Hello, what have we here?
This is Tatooine Sons, the only fan podcast to name a canon Star Wars creature and to be endorsed by the writer and the director of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson. Hey, has Rian Johnson ever done a superhero movie? I mean, he's done Star Wars, obviously, but I don't think he's ever done a superhero movie.
Not to my knowledge.
What universe would Rian Johnson best fit into? Would it be DC or would it be Marvel?
Marvel.
Why do you say that?
I don't know. He just has that kind of brand of humor, I think.
Okay, so for humor, what about you? How do you see him fitting into DC?
I could see him fitting into DC just fine. I mean, his brand of humor could be anything. I mean, Blue Beetle was super humorous. That's DC, so.
All right, well, now we're talking about Blue Beetle, and Blue Beetle has been said by James Gunn to be the first kind of foray into the new DC universe, first thing connected to the DC universe. How do you, each of you, first reaction, how do you see Blue Beetle connecting to James Gunn's DC universe?
I think that the character will stay the same. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting. And I think that the Blue Beetle movie will be kind of established as the overall origin for Blue Beetle, because every origin is usually the same throughout most alternate Earths and stuff. That kind of usually stays the same. So they're going to just be handling it like that, I think.
Yeah, I think it's you can have the character show up and this movie still be quote unquote canon. It doesn't really like set anything up or interfere with anything. So this, I think it could be like,
yeah, you never saw a Henry Cavill Superman or anything like that in this, so it connects still.
Yeah, I mean, just the characters of Batman and Superman and I think Wonder Woman were name dropped, but never shown or anything.
It is interesting that James Gunn has made comments in the past about DC's Kingdom Come, and we've been talking about DC's Kingdom Come. So the questions we're going to explore in this episode is how could the ideas, the themes of DC's Kingdom Come find themselves playing out in the future of the DC universe? That's going to be next after this message from our friends at the Christian Nerd HQ. This is Tatooine Sons.
We are the Reverend and the Reprobate, just two best buds interviewing people we have no business talking to. I'm Lucas Pinkard.
I'm Dan Gibson. These aren't tears on my face.
Every Thursday, we interview somebody else from our favorite fandoms and yours. You can check those interviews out on the Christian Nerd HQ network. You can find us on YouTube at RevRep Podcast at ReverendRep.com. And if you can't remember our name, just go to BaconOffice.com. It's way easier to find new episodes every Thursday. Thank you guys for supporting Christian Nerd HQ, and check out the Reverend and the Reprobate.
All of it.
What is the name of the porg on the Millennium Falcon?
Force is strong in my family.
What do you think his name is? It's a big moment.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Maybe Turbis?
Do or do not. There is no try.
Turbis? Pablo, if you're listening to this live stream, that porg's name is now Turbis. It's a good Star Wars name.
We're not done yet.
These guys recorded an awesome podcast called Tatooine Sons. Everybody was affected.
Was Aquaman used now?
I don't think so.
It was just Flash Batman.
It's interesting, though, that Aquaman hasn't been mentioned even in trailers yet, and they've got a movie coming out in just a few months. Is Aquaman 2 actually going to happen? I'll start with you, Sam. Do you think that movie is coming out? They have not announced anything like canceling it or anything like that.
I forgot that movie existed, honestly. Shoot. I think they're, with the performance of the last couple DC movies in the box office, that hasn't been stellar, and since they haven't even started marketing Aquaman, I can't imagine it's going to do great either, especially with the whole Amber Heard situation and all that. That's going to hurt it or affect it a little bit. So I wouldn't be surprised if they delayed it for a while.
BB Nate, what do you think?
Don't think it's right to determine this movie's success on the last couple of movies of DC, because the last couple of movies have been, Shazam, Black Adam, Blue Beetle, some smaller characters, and the first Aquaman movie was insanely popular, made over $1 billion. So this one will have at least some legs with that, but due to the strike, I think is the reason it would be delayed more than anything. They can't promote it. They genuinely cannot release trailers for that stuff quite yet, and they cannot have kind of this press tour that they're planning and everything. They can't have any of that until the strike's over, so they can't plan any of it until the strike is over. So that takes a lot. So,
well, I do know from conversations that I've had with people in the movie marketing world, because of my other life outside of this podcast, that they are in full planning mode for Aquaman 2's promotional campaign and marketing of it, and they're looking at doing some really interesting creative things. So who knows? We'll see. But this is a welcome to Tatooine Sons pop culture podcast. We believe that pop culture is the mythology of this generation, that there is a story, it is written on our souls, and that these myths speak to that story. And that is why we are in episode 7 of 8 of our series looking at the iconic DC Comics graphic novel Kingdom Come. And as we mentioned in the opening to the show, this episode is all about how Kingdom Come could potentially influence the DC universe going forward. Little comments have been made that it's already made an impact on, or the DC universe has already made an impact on some DC Kingdom Come stories, and whether or not those are going to be released. And so we're going to definitely have some conversations about that. But before we get started on this episode, we want to say thank you. Thank you for listening to this show, for being a part of the Tatooine Sons family. We appreciate that very much. Thank you for tuning in every single Tuesday. For those of you that are regular Tuesday listeners, I appreciate that very, very much. And we hope that you'll continue to get the message out about Tatooine Sons. Share it with your friends, share it with your circle of influence, retweet episodes, tweet episodes, email it, just carrier pigeon. I don't care how you get it to them. Put a QR code on a carrier pigeon and send it across New York City. That's all that matters, right? Just get the word out.
Yeah,
that'll work.
My kids are looking at me like I'm crazy.
That's the way to do it.
At least they know what a carrier pigeon is.
Of course.
With that. But it is an 8-episode series on DC's Kingdom Come, but don't be looking for episode 8 of the series next week, because it is on pause while we finalize our dates and recording schedule for our interview, BB Nate's interview, Nate the Great's interview with Mark Wade. And so we're very excited that one's going to be coming. So next week, we're actually going to be picking up with our new Ahsoka series. And yes, we are going to be touching on the Ahsoka TV series or streaming series a lot. It's going to be influencing our conversation in every conversation we have about Ahsoka. But this is a series, 8 episodes on Ahsoka, not just this television, or it's not really television, is it? Is it considered television series?
What?
Ahsoka.
It's a limited television series.
Is it a television series?
Yeah.
I always think linear TV when I say that, like going to show up on ABC or cable or something. But it's on TV, so I guess it's
that definition has changed a lot.
It has changed
in the past
a lot.
Few years.
But this series will be on Ahsoka and the character and the history of Ahsoka, how she was originally received, which is going to be a fun episode about Ashley Eckstein. We're going to talk about her. We're going to talk about Rosario Dawson, and we're going to talk about Ahsoka in The Mandalorian, and as well as this series and where we see this character going. And one question that we fully intend to continue to explore the idea behind is the
where's Ezra or what?
No, that's definitely going to be entering into some conversations. But is Ahsoka, even though she claims to not be a Jedi, or at least at the end of season 2 Rebels, she claims she's not a Jedi, is Ahsoka one of the greatest of the Jedi? We don't answer that on this one, but we will on the series. So make sure that you're ready to check that out. But let's stop talking about what we're going to talk about. Let's talk about what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. All right. Let's talk a little bit about Gunn's vision with this, guys. James Gunn has teased over the past year or so since he took over the DC universe and was announced to be doing that with Peter Safran. He's teased some ideas of potential adaptation of Kingdom Come, how his take might differ from the original comics tone and message, considering his history with both, obviously, his work with DC Universe, but also his previous history with Marvel, with Guardians of the Galaxy and those characters. What do you think are some of the unique twists that James Gunn could introduce if he were to bring in the ideas of Kingdom Come into the DC universe? Somebody take that answer. Go.
I'm honestly a bit nervous about Gunn doing it himself, because he tends to have a more humorous style, which is fine. It works great for Guardians and all of that. But I don't think that lends itself very well to a Kingdom Come story. It's a pretty heavy, serious topic and story, and I think if you try to throw too much humor into it, it almost feels irreverent to the source material. So, well, I'm not saying that his universe or whatever couldn't have this story. I don't see James doing it himself.
Okay, he's not going to be doing everything in the DCU himself, and I think that we have to think he's going to be doing Superman Legacy, and that doesn't lend itself too much to humor, and I feel like he's going to be doing that right and correctly and treating that character well. And I think that Kingdom Come does fit into the DCU if they want to make it, but I feel like he would find a right director and a correct writer for it to honor the source material, because he's as big of a comic fan as anybody else. And I think he has like 30 series on a pull list every month at his local comic store. Wow. So he reads comics all the time, and he respects them as much as we do. So I think that he understands the importance of this series and wouldn't undermine that in any way. And I think he could get a great director to do it. I would love to see like Steven Spielberg directing Kingdom Come. That would, because we know that they've had discussions.
There's some definite gravitas with him jumping in, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be huge. And he would do great with it.
What if they got Nolan to do it?
That would be good too, because he could write and direct. So,
well, it's interesting because in Superman Legacy, they've already talked about a number, and I can't even remember them, but a number of superhero characters making appearances.
Different ones. I forget. I think like Hawkgirl is one of them. Mr. Terrific. A couple others. I can't remember exactly.
Been several that have been confirmed to be a part of it. So you're bringing in, you've got in the Superman Legacy story, you've got obviously Superman. We expect and we know in the DC universe that we're going to be getting a version of Wonder Woman at some point. We know we're going to be getting our version of Batman in that. Mm-hmm. So you're getting some of these legacy characters. But then you bring up some of these other characters, Hawkgirl, Mr. Terrific, and others who are more fringe characters with this. Do you think that this is sort of getting characters on the table for a future story later on in the DC universe, maybe several years, kind of as an end game type approach where we could be bringing in a Kingdom Come?
I wouldn't be surprised, especially with this first chapter being titled, Gods and Monsters. Kind of fits the vibe of what Kingdom Come could be, especially with there's like a final movie in this chapter, because we know there's going to be at least 2 in this universe. And so I feel like it lends itself very well to introducing, because Mr. Terrific is a younger superhero, and same with Hawkgirl. They're more younger, and it's also kind of sets up a Young Justice storyline that they could do as well with Young Justice League and stuff, and it lends itself very well to creating a new storyline for Kingdom Come.
Sam, you bring up his humorous style, as we saw obviously through Guardians of the Galaxy, those 3 films in the MCU, and then of course, very irreverent, over the top humor in the DC EU with the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, that type of thing that he was a part of. But we also see especially in the last Guardians film, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, a very heavy emotional weight to it. Do you feel like if James Gunn, all of this is speculation at this point, we know that, but if James Gunn were to have his hands very, very closely on a Kingdom Come type story in it, that he could pull off the emotional weight that's necessary for a story like this, or would the humor overshadow it so much?
I guess it depends on how it's used. You can have humor kind of just give people a little bit of a breathing point, but when it becomes about the jokes, I guess it can take you out of of a story pretty quickly, especially one like Kingdom Come.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the philosophical. That's the word I was looking for. It's on the notes right there.
It is.
And that's how you say it. Can you say it for me again? Philosophical. Thank you. Underpinnings on this. Kingdom Come is known for these things. We talked about it at length the last several episodes with it. So in this potential cinematic or even animated adaptations, which we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, under Gunn, how might these philosophical, that's the word, right? Elements be portrayed or perhaps further emphasized for the audience?
Well, that's difficult because we don't know what direction they're really going to be taking with this Kingdom Come. If they're going to be focusing on that as much as the superhero side of the story, or if the philosophical aspects of the story will take kind of a back seat. It depends on, again, who they get to direct it. It's really down to that. But I do feel like they will respect the series, and that is a huge part of the series. And so don't think that it'll be taken out of it, but I'm not sure how it's going to be fully portrayed in the storyline as well.
Sam, what do you think about how the audience would react to a film or a live action or animated story that is so philosophical in nature when it comes to these superheroes? Are they ready for that type of a thing, or do they just want, give me my MCU in the DC universe, let them be superheroes and bad guys and flying around, and I want to eat popcorn and drink soda and not have these things? How do you think the audience would react to a Kingdom Come type film?
I think they would be just fine. I mean, it's like how well the Batman did. It was very much not a huge superhero movie. It was a detective story through and through, and audiences loved it. Same with I think fans would appreciate a deeper story in DC, because I think for DC to succeed, it needs to differentiate itself from Marvel, and I think that means having deeper, more philosophical stories rather than a popcorn flick.
Yeah, definitely, and you got to kind of point out the fact that the most popular MCU or the most popular Marvel TV show is still Daredevil, and that definitely dives into the more philosophical aspects of the character and definitely those deeper aspects. And so I feel like audiences are if it's done well, ready for that. Not Eternals. I mean, Eternals tried to do that, but it just wasn't done right in that aspect and just felt off. But with the Batman, kind of diving more deeper into the character's psyche, it was done well and still had a great story and a great movie. So it all depends on how it's done.
There was, and I know we've talked about this in some previous episodes, and we touched on it briefly, but there was an animated version of Kingdom Come in development when James Gunn and Peter Safran took over the DC universe, and that has been halted. And there's a lot of different reasons, but primarily because they wanted to make sure that story didn't interfere. Because isn't that basically it?
They wanted to respect it enough, and they were just afraid it was going to get lost in the change of.
So explain to me, flesh that out a little bit for those of us that don't understand what you're meaning.
The story was being made under the past regime for DC, and it was they didn't want it to be kind of having to transfer over between two different regimes to where it just kind of got lost and muddied and wasn't as good as it could be.
Okay, so there's that huge respect for the Kingdom Come. That was what right. did that. Okay, how did these challenges, what are some of the challenges and the opportunities that differ in this Kingdom Come story between adapting it for animation? Start with you, Nate, versus trying to do Kingdom Come in live action. What would be some of the advantages and disadvantages of both?
With advantages, it feels like you can do more grand things in animation. You can tell different types of stories without having to worry about, oh, does the CGI look good here and all that stuff, trying to make sure that the live action aspects work. It's just all animated, and that works a bit better for the characters, and you can tell better stories. But it's also more difficult to make animated stories fleshed out as long, because they do take longer to film and animate fully, and so that can usually dumb down the length of an animated film to about an hour and a half, because it's just difficult to make a movie that length in a short amount of time. So it all depends on their budget and time and planning out ahead of time. Because, I mean, Across the Spider-Verse took over 5 years, 6 years to make. So that just shows how difficult it is. And yes, that was the longest big budget studio animated film of all time, but still that only clocked in about 2.5 hours itself. So it's just very difficult to make animated movies in a good length.
Let's assume, Sam, that they made the decision to do an animated, just for hypothetical purposes, fully do an animated version of Kingdom Come, and they were committed to doing how many ever movies, maybe even 4 movies, right? So it's 4 comics or 4 issues in the series, right?
Yes.
Do 4 different movies so that there's no loss of depth in the storytelling and all of that. But one of the most important elements to the success of the Kingdom Come graphic novel series is the visual style of it. Would you want them to try their best to mimic an Alex Ross in live animation, or are you okay for them kind of going into some new territory with, some of the different types of animation that we've seen with the latest Puss in Boots movie was a different type of animation, obviously Across the Spider-Verse, Into the Spider-Verse.
I don't see why you couldn't merge the two.
Explain.
Well, I mean, Alex Ross's style is very distinct, right? And there's been a trend in animation lately to kind of go down a stylized approach, right?
Yes,
with
definitely.
Across the Spider-Verse and TMNT and things like that. I don't see why you couldn't create an animation style that is 3D animated but looks, or at least feels, like Alex Ross's style. I don't think that's impossible. Now, I can't figure it out because I'm not an artist, an animator, but I think there is some marriage that could be made there that could really sell the visuals. I think it would be tough. That's a lot, because you got to somehow make animation look realistic without being uncanny, kind of like Polar Express.
Yeah.
So you got to find a way to execute that effectively, which probably adds to development time, but I think it could be done.
Do you think that audiences, one of the challenges, okay, we'll look at it from a Star Wars perspective for just a minute because of who we are as a podcast, right? One of the challenges that people are having right now in the Ahsoka series is that they have dismissed, for the history of Star Wars, dismissed animation in Star Wars as being for kids. So they didn't participate in, a large portion of general Star Wars fans have not watched the Clone Wars and have not watched Star Wars Rebels.
Right.
So they're not connected with the story of Ahsoka and the Ghost crew that's required to really fully appreciate what's going on in Ahsoka with that. Do you think that movie-going audiences, the general audience, have reached, both of you guys can answer this, have reached the level of appreciation for animation that would be required for a DC's Kingdom Come animated story to really truly be successful in the theater?
I think so. I think if it's marketed as such, it's not marketed as a kids movie. I mean, let's just be really honest here. TMNT, Puss in Boots, even Spider-Verse to an extent, are still kind of geared towards younger audiences. I think if the Kingdom Come movies were presented as more of an adult animation style, I'm not talking R, I'm talking, PG-13 style movie, I think audiences would appreciate it, especially if it looks like they're going to adapt the source material well and it looks well executed. And with the reputation that these stories hold, I think audiences would be interested in that.
Yeah, it comes down to the fact that most people in kind of the superhero movie world understand that DC animation isn't for kids. It hasn't really been for a very long time. It's more geared towards the adult. It's just regular DC stories told in animation, and that's what it's been for over 10 years now. That's what we've gotten with some of the best.
Well, and even going back to the Mask of the Phantasm, which felt very adult in the way that it was presented.
It's dark and a lot of adult themes in it that just completely would go over kids' heads at that time. So it's kind of how DC has dealt with animation, and you don't have to kind of dumb it down for kids to be able to watch it or have audiences think, oh, this is a kids movie at all. And we know that animated DC movies are coming back to theaters in this new DCU. James Gunn has said that. So wouldn't surprise me if we're getting at least some type of animated big story on the big screen, because animation for superheroes has taken a different approach now. Animation itself is now becoming a big deal in cinema and being recognized as a very good way to tell stories that just otherwise couldn't be told correctly. I mean, even Guillermo del Toro said that in his speech at the Oscars last year. He's like, I understand now that animation is a way I can tell stories that I wasn't able to before. And that's why it's completely switching to animation for the rest of his film career, which is awesome because his Pinocchio was fabulous. It was amazing. And so it's being shown now that animation can be for anything, and anyone can enjoy it at this point. And so, I mean, even with James Gunn, his favorite superhero movie of all time is Into the Snyderverse. And so he obviously respects animation for superheroes, and I definitely think that we're going to be seeing a lot more of that when it comes to the DCU.
One of the biggest challenges that James Gunn and Peter Safran face, and that DC and Warner Brothers face when it comes to the DC universe, is the polarizing nature of the Snyderverse. And the Snyderverse
Courtesy
fans...
of Christopher Nolan.
Well, explain to me what you mean by that.
So Nolan helped write and produce Man of Steel and Batman v Superman to an extent, and the Snyder Cut, Zack Snyder's Justice League. Those were the three movies he worked on for the Snyderverse, really. And I think he helped some with the Wonder Woman movie as well. So
the original, first one.
The first one. So the more I hear about Zack Snyder's future vision for what the Snyderverse would have been, the more I'm a firm believer that without Christopher Nolan behind these movies, we would have had a very different set of the Snyderverse that I feel like a lot more people wouldn't have enjoyed. So it comes down to the fact that without Nolan, I feel like the Snyderverse wouldn't have been a thing.
Okay. That's interesting. That's an interesting take from Nate. Let's talk a little bit about that Snyderverse now. Because you've got it has got a very, very passionate fan base. People that support Henry Cavill as Superman, and Ben Affleck as Batman, and Gal Gadot, and Jason Momoa, and even Ezra Miller to an extent. Those characters, Ray Fisher as Cyborg, all of that, and want to see some of those stories play out. Want to see those actors continuing to portray those characters. So the biggest challenge that Gunn and Safran have with the DC universe is finding a way to bring in that fan base that is not buying into any direction that does not include the Snyderverse. Am I right in saying that?
No, I get it, but that just comes down to DC fans.
Oh, I understand. Yeah, no, I understand, but it's a challenge, right? And as a business, Warner Brothers needs to find a solution to that challenge. Does a Kingdom Come story that ties into your Snyderverse actors and characters, with that's maybe an Elseworlds version, or even something that happens later in the DC universe and brings those characters in, does that satisfy them? Is that possible? Is that something that we could see playing out?
Oh, I mean, I don't think it really makes a difference. I think that fans are going to complain it's just any fandom. I think that eventually they will realize that this is what they're getting, and this is kind of a mean approach, but this is what they're getting, and if they don't want to consume it, they don't have to.
You get what you get, and you don't pitch a fit.
Basically, let's just be honest. Now there is something to be said for pandering towards your audience. I mean, you got it. These are movie studios; they've got to make money, right? It's a business, and if fans aren't watching, they aren't watching. But if they're still, if these movies are still doing well, despite the Snyder fanboys or whatever not watching it, then I don't think they need to make a change, really.
Well, it's difficult to say that the Snyderverse fans won't watch this, because DC fans talk a big talk about not watching things, and then they end up watching them and loving them and saying that they always loved it and always thought it was a great idea. We go to most recently Robert Pattinson as Batman. Everybody was like, why are we having Sparkle Vampire Boy as Batman? And then the movie came out, everybody loved it, and they were like, oh, I always knew he was going to be a great Batman. And then we go to the most prevalent example as Heath Ledger as Joker. A lot of people were very frustrated by that. And they said, we're not going to watch that movie. We're not going to watch a movie with Heath Ledger as Joker. Are you insane? Christopher Nolan, what are you doing? That's such a dumb decision. Exactly like how they are now with James Gunn. Are you insane? You're getting rid of Henry Cavill as Superman. That's such a dumb decision. But then we have The Dark Knight being
one of the highest rated films of all
films
time.
Of all time,
right.
Let alone superhero films.
And that character winning Heath Ledger winning a posthumous Oscar for that role.
And then even Michael Keaton as Batman. People were so frustrated. Mr. Mom as Batman, Beetlejuice, that guy as Batman, that's never going to work. And now all of these people that watch that as when they're younger keep saying that he's the best Batman. And that he's always going to be the best Batman. So it comes down to the fact that DC fans say a lot. They talk a big game, but they'll end up seeing it, and they'll end up most likely enjoying it. And so I don't think that the Snyderverse fans will have any problems seeing Superman Legacy. I don't think they'll have any problems enjoying Superman Legacy. I think it'll be a great movie and will definitely be a good kicking off point for DCU.
Last thing on the Snyderverse Kingdom Come connections there. Obviously, Kingdom Come's version of our legacy characters is darker. It's more nuanced, and so is the Snyderverse, right? Those characters are deeper and darker and things. Do those characters and versions of the characters, do they match up well for that to be something that could be played out in Elseworlds or something like that?
I mean, potentially, but I don't think that at this point you need to keep worrying about the Snyderverse. I mean, it's obvious that Zack Snyder, he's doing great making his own stuff, which is amazing. I mean, he's making Rebel Moon. He's going to be making a TV series, a video game off of it. He's making his own universe over at Netflix, which is great. I don't think the DC needs to worry about bringing him back on, especially later on when the DCU is already established, because then it'll already be established, but then they're going back to the Snyderverse after what we would consider to be 4 years or something. So that just doesn't seem to fit.
Yeah, I think it's time to let the Snyderverse kind of be done. While it would be nice to have gotten maybe a little more Henry Cavill and things like that, or see the fruition of the Justice League and things like that. I think at this point, it's been long enough. I think, we've got this new universe starting. I think it's time to kind of let the old stuff,
and that's
be alone.
Not to say that you won't be able to see Henry Cavill Superman again in a later movie. I mean, you bring in a Crisis on Infinite Earths. Right. I mean, the Snyderverse finds a way to be perfect for that, because that's just that's a multiversal story, and you could have that Justice League team up with the DCU Justice League, and everybody would lose their minds, because that's just awesome, and that would work so well. So no, it's not an ending for the Snyderverse. It's just we're moving to different main continuity at this point.
Kind of a two-part question to kind of close out here. Do you, if they chose to go down creating some type of a Kingdom Come story within the DC universe, because they've said that the DC universe is going to be completely interconnected, crossing over between animated and comics and games and live action and TV and all that. So it's all connected, right? So if they do a Kingdom Come, that's the DC universe side of it. The other alternative would be an Elseworlds story of DC Kingdom Come. So that's the first part. Would you prefer it to be part of the DC universe, or do you want it to be Elseworlds? And second part of that question, do you want it to be live action or animated?
I want it to be Elseworld, because it's an Elseworld story itself. The thing is in this story, it's decades in the future where these the main cast of characters are older now, and there's a bunch of new characters, and I think it'd be weird to try and throw that in the DCU when we're just starting out. So I want it to be an Elseworld story. As for live action or animated, I don't really have a preference as long as it's done well. I like the idea of it being animated in a stylized way where it kind of looks like Alex Ross's style. I think that would be great. I think if it were live action and they got a good cast and the effects were well done, I think that would be great as well. But I think it needs to be Elseworlds.
Nate?
I think that if it is in the main continuity, I feel like it has to be later on in the universe. If not, kind of the final movie of the universe, because I feel like James Gunn will know when to end this series, or at least the next part of passing the torch to a newer generation of superheroes a little bit better than the MCU did. Because with the MCU, their passing of the torch was a bit, as of now, kind of phase 4 was that passing of the torch, and it's felt a little bit disjointed. But with Kingdom Come, they could have it be these older superheroes are established still in this universe, but it's time for the new superheroes to be kind of take that front and center part now. Instead of killing them off or anything like that, you're just allowing this to be a different storyline, a different direction. So it could be after, the last movie in these next 2 chapters that they're doing, which is like 10 years out at this point, which is a long time when you think of what the MCU did in 10 years. It's definitely enough time for the DCU to establish a well done universe and then finish that first part out. So I think in the DCU would work, and if it is kind of that final point, it would have to be live action, I feel like, because building up to the big final movie and then having it be animated feels a little bit kind of just safe in a way. You got to take some big risks with that type of movie, and Kingdom Come itself was a risk to begin with, and so making it a live action movie, and I'm sure they could do great with effects, especially who knows where we'll be in 10 years with effects, because we already have the volume now and the technology is only growing, so I'm sure we'll get some amazing technology by then.
Well, let's take a second to kind of think about the themes of Kingdom Come and James Gunn and the future of this, and look at it from a little bit of a dad moment perspective.
I am your father.
So when I was growing up, the heroes we read about in comics kind of taught us very simple lessons about right and wrong. And then Kingdom Come came out, and it's much more of a revelation because it questioned those notions, adding a lot of different layers of depth into the characters that I've loved since I was a child there. So it reminds me of how life isn't just always black and white. It's filled with different shades of gray. And James Gunn, one of his gifts in storytelling is he has a knack for capturing that human element within these larger than life characters, showing us their vulnerabilities and their flaws. So when thinking about a potential adaptation, I'm reminded of the importance of understanding and embracing change, whether it's in our favorite comics transitioning to the big screen or in our own lives. It's crucial to understand that while times change, the core essence remains. And the same way that while cinematic interpretations might differ, the heart of the story and the characters endure beyond that. So it'll be fascinating to see how these worlds collide, the world of James Gunn's vision, and then potentially the legendary, iconic, 3-decade-old story of Kingdom Come. Right. It's essential to respect the past while embracing the future, and to stay true to one's roots while growing and adapting. I think James Gunn has a respect for the past, and I think that he's going to bring that into the DC universe. But that's also a lesson that's not just for movies or comics. It's for life as well. So. Well, that'll do it. And then, like we said at the beginning, we're going to pause this series for a few weeks while we begin talking about Ahsoka and allowing the Ahsoka series on Disney Plus to color and add depth to our conversations about Ahsoka and her stories, and her as a character and her impact in the Star Wars galaxies. With that going forward, so we're going to be excited to do that. And then when we are able to get the final episode of this series released after Nathan is able to interview Mark Waid, which will be happening soon, we will definitely let you know when that's coming, give you a couple weeks to prepare and be ready to go on that. Yeah. So that'll be it. If anyone wants to give us any feedback, where can they do that?
Well, we are on Facebook and X, formerly known Twitter.
I feel like it's always like Prince, right? Like the artist formerly known as Prince. Do you guys know about that story?
Nope.
He changed his name due to a copyright thing for a few years. He no longer he legally changed his name, and he legally changed his name to a symbol that he created, and so nobody knew what to call him, and so they started calling him the artist formerly known as Prince. And then suddenly the copyright thing got settled, and so he took his name back. So I think Twitter's the platform formerly known as Twitter.
Yes,
and it's the symbol is the X.
That's true. Yeah.
Good.
Interesting.
Now you know.
Now I know. Anyway, we're on that website and Instagram, Facebook, all of that stuff. Tatooine Sons, SONS, same for our website, tatooinesons.com. You can find us in all of those spots.
Yeah, and if you want to leave us a review or a rating on whatever podcast app you're listening to or whatever, we'd be more than appreciative to hear your thoughts on the show and whatever you think. And if you could share this with friends and everything from whatever app you're listening to, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. We so appreciate you guys listening every single week, downloading this, giving us feedback, interacting with us on social media, and sharing this with your circle of influence, with your friends, your families. And if you don't like this episode, you're your enemies with that. And if you don't like it, that'd be the perfect thing to do. We'd appreciate that. So anyway, that'll pretty much do it for this week. Yeah. Next week we start talking about Ahsoka. Anything you guys want to say in the meantime?
May the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you, always.
This party's over.
I like that Wookiee.
Don't get technical with me.
Joy, please.
Yep, yep.